Today's interview is with Daniel Spear. Daniel talks about how he got into multifamily syndications without no real prior real estate experience or business experience. He talks about how he did it. He started off doing whatever he could to help a group of syndicators and then kind of grew into the GP partnership position and then kind of grew from strength to strength from there. He also talks about a little bit of mindset stuff, right, about the victim mentality. So it's a really, really interesting interview. So I'd stick around today and enjoy that if I was you. As always, like and subscribe on Wrestling with Real Estate, the YouTube channel. Go to the WWRE podcast and give me a 5-star rating and write me a review, a good one, of course. And I'm looking to speak to as many of you as possible. Whoever's interested in real estate and would like to have a conversation with me, there's a link in the description down below, or you can go to wrestlingwithrealestate.com, the website, and there's a sign up page there as well, because I'd like to get to know you, see if there's any way I can help you. But before that, enjoy today's great interview with Daniel Spear.
Hello and welcome to Wrestling with Real Estate, where we look to chokeslam all your real estate problems. I'm your host, former WWE wrestler and now Cirque du Soleil performer, and of course, multifamily real estate investor, Barri Griffiths. Now today we have Daniel with us. Hey Daniel, how are you doing?
I am doing great, Barry. How you doing?
I'm doing fantastic. I'm excited to get into today's talk. Before we get into that, where are you right now? You told me before, but for the people listening.
I am in Portland, Oregon, Barry.
Okay, how's the weather there today?
It is a perfect fall day. It couldn't be better.
Okay, are you guys getting ready for winter there though? Do you guys get rough winters?
We get a dark and very gloomy winter, which actually it's kind of romantic with like the short days and the darkness and stuff. It's the spring where it's like April, May, June. That's where it gets tough around here for me.
Okay. The reason I was asking, I'm from Wales, so I assumed I thought you guys had similar weather. So
yeah. It's kind of fun, like November, December, and then by like March, April, like why am I living here? And
Cool.
then there's that first day in May where like everybody wears shorts for the first time, like the one kind of nice day, and everybody's like legs are like white, like those kind of like those asparagus that like Belgian people like, you know, it's like reflecting off it and blinding it. Then it gets dark again, and then finally in July it gets nice.
Well, thank you for being here today. I appreciate you making the time. Before we get into it, do you want to tell us a little bit about your background and kind of what you're focused on right now?
Sure. So I started real estate about 3 years ago with zero business experience, zero entrepreneurial experience, and zero real estate experience. And so long story short, my background, I got a master's degree in a field which I am still in. I still have my day job, and that was a dream come true out of grad school, and it was really great for several years. And then the dream turned into sort of a nightmare, which is a long story, which is not really worth repeating here, because I think the most boring story in the world is the how I got screwed at work story. So I'm not gonna go there. But long story short, that was really frustrating, and I played the victim with that for a while, because I think justifiable frustration or justifiable anger is in some ways like the worst curse, because your heart is saying, hey, this is terrible, I'm really annoyed. And then your mind's like, yeah, this is terrible, I'm really annoyed. And eventually I realized, if I wanted to take control of my life and do something other than be justifiably bitter about my day job, and that frustration was spilling over everywhere and kind of limiting me, I was going to have to find something outside of that box to go do. And real estate is sort of in my blood. On my mom's side, my grandma did kind of like a house hack with like a single family home, a duplex and a fourplex. And despite growing up fleeing the Dust Bowl and not coming from wealth at all, she was able to retire very nicely in Hawaii, basically just on that and on her pension. And then my grandfather was actually a refugee from Ukraine, and he also came to the United States with nothing. and then was able in time to start a business, get some income from the business, and then buy up some light industrial land around Seattle. And he did quite well with that in the 50s and 60s. So on a whim, I went to a few real estate conferences, and just something said, "This is it. You got to do it." And so I just dived in.
Cool. Very interesting story. I think, you talked about it there, and I love talking about this all the time, is the mindset aspect of stuff, right? I think it's really fascinating for me because I've been on a journey myself to sort of learn about mindset and kind of develop that myself, because, being in sports, you somewhat have it, being a pro wrestler and whatever else before that, being in Cirque du Soleil now, you somewhat have that. But at the same time, coming here to the US and learning so much more about mindset there, because it's not so big in the UK. I've been on kind of that journey myself, and I think it's fascinating, and I talk about it all the time because it's, real estate is the tool that we use, right? But the mindset is really what gets us places, is what drives us and what makes us make things happen. And I'm always fascinated by people's mindset and how they, and I think it's really interesting that you say, because it's so easy to be caught up in that victim mentality, or that, get caught up in that negativity, right? Because it's I don't know, it's almost, to me sometimes it's comfort in negativity, right? Oh, this is going wrong, or that's bad, and this and that, right? And it's just easy, so much easier to be in negativity. I don't know why our brains are wired like that, but it seems like that negativity is easy to get into, and it's a fight to be positive, right? You've got to really fight to be positive. So maybe, before we really get into the real estate, if you can talk about a little bit how you were able to transition from maybe that negativity and that fight to get into that positivity, because I think that could help people, because I'm sure there's a lot of people in the same situation as you've been.
So I would say, and you mentioned this also, negativity is easy. Ultimately, it's a form of laziness, because if there are external factors or things that you think are undermining you and making you not happy or not live the life you want to live, and you just sit there blaming those things, even if there's a very good mental or emotional reason to blame those things, ultimately you are not taking control of your own life. You are not in charge. You are choosing to play the victim, and that requires absolutely nothing of you. You can just sit there, not be happy how things are, and not do anything about it. And I think you said positivity is harder in some ways. And I think that's largely because positivity means proactivity. And that means, oh gosh, I am in control of my destiny. I am an agent, or I should be an agent to get what I want to out of life. And suddenly, in the negative mindset, nothing is on your shoulders. In the positive mindset, in a lot of almost everything. I mean, hopefully you have a spouse or a partner or a girlfriend or what have you, or family members and friends who help you out. But ultimately, you're the one who has to go do it. And at least I found, even things you don't have, they're not that hard to do. You don't need to be a rocket scientist. It's sometimes just as easy as writing an email and just pressing send. And yet you get that itchy feeling in your guts, and it's scary, and you don't want to do it. And I think it's that responsibility. It's all up to you. And I think for me, starting sort of an entrepreneurial journey, and I've heard this from other people as well, it's terrifying because it's all on you. And it's like you wake up some morning, it's like you've been shot out of a cannon. I mean, because it's both thrilling, but it's also scary. And I think that place of responsibility for many people, it's just easier to avoid that discomfort. And even if it means going on being bitter and unhappy.
Yeah, so true. And it's even, sometimes, I'm so guilty of this. Like you said, you touch it, even the simplest things, right? Sending that email or shooting a text or making a phone call. Sometimes it's challenging. And for who knows what reason, it's easier to just be like, okay, I'll just sit on the couch, or I'll just drink my coffee, or I'll just stay in bed another half an hour or whatever. Because it's just easier to do that, right? But you've got to fight that, and it's that challenge, and it's that daily challenge. Me, anyway, it is to get past that and get out of your comfort zone, and not feel sorry for yourself, and tell yourself that you can do this, and all your dreams and aspirations are out there if you're willing to take charge of your life.
Absolutely. I have a couple of mantras about that I repeat to myself, and if I find my mind getting into that negative space, and it goes like this: boo-hoo weakens you, follow through strengthens you. And just remind that every time. If you're feeling bitter, boo-hoo weakens you. That's all it is.
I love that. So true, right? I love that. I love that mantra, and maybe I don't use mantras enough, but that might be enough to snap you out of it, right? Because that's a lot of times all you need is that second to sort of snap you out and then take that action and move forward. And I find as well, and not to make this all about about procrastination or whatever, but what I find, once I start something, even if it's the simplest thing in the world, even if I just go sit in front of my computer and pull up what I need to do, and I don't do anything for a couple of minutes, I find eventually I get to it, and it's just that simple thing of putting it in front of you that starts that ball rolling. And once I've done that first thing, I find, I don't know about yourself, but once I find that first thing, I've got my ball rolling, then I'm doing the next thing, and then all of a sudden I'm like, wow.
Yeah, the hardest part is starting.
Yeah, so true, so true. Well, cool. Well, that was hopefully that helps people, because I feel like people, they don't take action, and I didn't for the longest time take enough action. I think that mindset component of stuff is so important. It's to understand how to do it, maybe, or why you don't do it, or just to figure it out, and so you can take that action. And I think I love talking about that. It's just so fascinating to me. So thank you for indulging me in that for for a few minutes. So then you talked about, that you wanted to kind of go over to that positive side, to get out of that, woe is me, or whatever it was. And you talked about that your grandparents both invested in real estate, right? Did they take you around it? Did they advise you? Or was it just you knew that they'd done that, so you'd kind of seen the success that they'd had?
I know that they had done it. My grandfather died when I was relatively young. He died relatively young. He was only 72 and I was only 7. So I was too young to really be cognizant of any of that sort of stuff. And my grandmother, she was already sort of retired in Hawaii by and large by the time I was like 8, 9, 10, and I really had a clue. So I kind of found out after the fact that they had done all this stuff. My own parents on both sides, they hadn't chosen to really go anywhere near to real estate professionally. So it was just not something I really grew up around, and I didn't really know about it, but I feel like it was still sort of, excuse me, it was sort of dormant there in my blood when I got into some of the real estate things. And I think just even like the Facebook ads and things I saw about that, I just kind of, it just felt right on some deep level. And I was like, I just have to go with this. So I did it.
Cool. So what was your first venture into the real estate world then? So you mentioned that you went to some seminars, I believe.
Yeah. So a lot of this, and I would recommend this for other people who are starting out. When you go to some of these seminars and these trainings and things, and there's a whole like smorgasbord of them out there. And maybe this isn't quite as true in the COVID era, unfortunately, because networking face-to-face is really hard now. But just being around people at those things who are doing what you want to do and asking them questions and learning from them and hearing their stories is really helpful, because people who have had, tremendous success, they're, especially I find in the real estate world and probably elsewhere too, but I just met more of them in the real estate context. A lot of them are not that fancy or smart, or they're really just people. And so just to see what it's been like and to hear their journeys and to see how doable it is really helpful. And then I've always gotten just so much out of just talking to people and meeting people and getting into that habit really of making real estate, a secondary job and not just like a hobby or something you kind of dabble in, because it can't work that way. You have to really eat and breathe it to make it go at it, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And you touched on it there. Networking is such a great thing, right? Just to get out there. And a lot of successful real estate people are just, like you said, they're good people, you know,
Yeah.
and they're very approachable. They're very kind. They're very generous with their time, and they're willing. As long as you're serious and you're not wasting their time or whatever, right? They're going to help you. I found that so much. That people were willing to give up their time and willing to help you in any way they can, despite their success, right? So I think it's also, I was guilty of thinking, oh, these successful people, they won't have time for me. They won't be able to, they won't want to help me. But in fact, it's the opposite, right? They go above and beyond when you make that connection and you're able to have that conversation with them and get to know them and talk about real estate, and you're treating it, like you said, like a business, not like a hobby that you do here and there. If you treat it like a business, they're kind of going to see that as well. And, that's going to lead to hopefully a lot of success for you, because your network is your net worth, right? It's a saying that you hear all the time, but it's so true.
Yeah. And just to piggyback on that a little bit, people talk about the abundance mentality versus the scarcity mentality. And the abundance mentality in real estate is, here's somebody who's newer at this than I am. If I help them out, maybe 5 years down the road, they're doing something incredible, because 5 years ago, the person you were talking to is probably starting out themselves. And if I make this relationship now, even though I'm much further along than they are, maybe I'm partnering with this person in 5 years on a really great deal. Whereas I find in a lot of office work, it's that scarcity mentality. If somebody else gets the promotion, then I'm not getting it. And that just creates... that's part of what makes, I think, office atmospheres often very difficult. And by and large, it's really the opposite in real estate. It's people are willing to help each other and really willing to give very freely. Because if you find someone that you work well with and you get along with, then you could be partners in a few years. Who knows? So
yeah, absolutely right. And a rising tide raises all ships.
Absolutely.
So, what was your first venture into real estate? What was your first investment?
So my first investment was as a key partner with another more established group who had a program, I guess, for lack of a better phrase, going where I could invest into their deal at about the same way that a limited partner would. But then I was kind of given sort of odd jobs, I guess, so to speak. So for instance, it was up to me to talk to all the different appliance wholesalers to try to figure out what the best deal was for the appliance package that we were going to upgrade the building with. And so that's not kind of a make or break business decision, but so it's sort of information gathering. And then I just gave that to the lead sponsors, and they did with it what they would. But stuff like that was helpful, and it was a great way to get into a deal and also get to meet some people. So that was my first one. That was, oh gosh, it's all such a blur now. I think that was about 2 years ago, August, September 2018, I believe.
Okay, so that was obviously an apartment syndication.
Yes, yeah.
What was the reasoning? So you've got to some seminars and whatnot and learn some stuff about real estate. Why was it that you chose multifamily? Or you could have done single family rentals, flips, wholesaling, tax liens. You could have done any of that stuff, right? What was it about multifamily that attracted you?
I guess in some ways it was sort of random, because that was, of the first real estate seminar I went to, that's what it was about. So, and I honestly thought it'd be more kind of 3-plexes, 4-plexes, and I could kind of go find like, a 5-plex somewhere locally and all that stuff, which is a great way to go. Although that's tough to do here in Portland, Oregon. But really, and I've met a lot of people who kind of wind up in multifamily, ultimately sort of starting with fixes and flips and then going to some other things. I think what's great about multifamily is generally, just 2 or 3 roofs and many units. And also, whereas I think by and large, like a duplex or a 3-plex is basically like a house, a 50-unit apartment building is a business. And like any other business, you want to try to reduce expenses, make investments to increase revenues, and then it's really valued in that way. Whereas like by and large, a duplex or a 3-plex, hopefully you buy it in the right place, it cash flows a little bit, and really you're counting on the general area improving to create more appreciation. And that's important in multifamily too, but you have a lot more control to increase the revenue of the building, and then have that be what is ultimately valuable, and you're not just hoping that you chose the right neighborhood, although you want to choose the right neighborhood too, of course.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's so true. And it's so true that it's essentially a business, right? You're buying a business that, because it's real estate, people, they get fixated on the real estate, but the bricks and mortar that you're buying, right? Yes, it has a value, but what has the value is the tenants, right? And the rent that they pay, and the money that you can make from that, right? That's where the value is in that, right? More than any of the color of the building, or what kind of TVs they have, or whatever. That's irrelevant to some extent. It's what the business is making. It's that income stream that's what valued in that. And then and the great thing is as well, compared to other businesses, so when you think of it as a business, the great thing about multifamily, for the most part, right, you can buy a completely vacant building. For the most part, you're buying a building that cash flows day one, right? Day one.
Otherwise, you better have a pretty good plan. But yeah.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. So the first day you buy that business, you're cash flowing. I'm cash flowing nice, and you're hopefully making good returns day one, and you're planning on obviously improving that. Whereas you start your own restaurant, or you start your own whatever business it is. Day one, you're definitely not cash flowing. Probably day 100, you're probably not cash flowing. It's going to take a while for you to recoup your expenses and to get your business up and running to that point where you're actually making money. And that's the fantastic thing about multifamily, amongst other things. But as a business, as it relates to business, that day one, you should be cash flowing. Hopefully, if you're doing it right.
Yeah, that's a point, Barry.
Yeah. So that was your first one. Are you still involved in that?
No, I was given actually an opportunity to get my equity out of that one, which I did, because by then I had done my first deal as a general partner, and I was getting ready to do my second one, and it's a lot easier if you have a little bit of money for earnest money and for other things, to be able to put that into the syndication with your other partners, and because otherwise you have to try to raise the earnest money from somebody else, and that can be really hard to do. So it's nice to have you and your partners each have $25,000, $50,000, $75,000 or so to be able to put into the earnest money and put into the project to start with. So I got that out in order to kind of be fully prepared to go get another deal.
So talk about your first deal as a GP. That's a really cool story, I think. Where was the deal? How did you find the deal? And then what did you like about the deal?
So actually the deal goes back to the people I was a key partner with. This is based out of Houston, Texas. And at that point, this firm had grown a fair amount. And so relatively smaller deals that were part of their deal flow, they just weren't as interested in doing anymore. And so they actually got me together with 3 other people who had been key partners with them. And they said, hey guys, here's one that's too small for us. Would you like to go do it? And I said, absolutely, yes. Let's go do that. So what was a little weird about it, and I think one case where we were all very fortunate, and one thing I think it's really important for people to understand, maybe who haven't been a general partner in a deal before, is that your business partners, it really is like a marriage. While we were taking the deal down in the first month or two after takeover, I would say I communicated with them more than with any other people in my life, the 3 of them. I like to go through our group text thing, and it's just like hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of texts. And so the fact that we didn't know each other, this was around Thanksgiving of 2018, I think, when we sort of started the journey. So it's just amazing that I look back and it's like, I know who any of these guys were, 2018 now. And then by Thanksgiving 2019, there's 1,000 text messages I had exchange with them, and just all this other stuff. And so I would say I was very fortunate that the 4 of us, we got along really well. We all worked really hard. I think we were all sort of the star at different points, which is also really helpful. We all had different strengths, and the fact that worked out was kind of good luck. But I would suggest to other people, just know ahead of time that if you're not going to have at least a good, friendly business relationship with your partners, the whole thing will collapse in a heartbeat. So make sure that you partner up with people that you get along with, and you don't have to be best friends. It can definitely be just a pure business relationship. But if there are people who, for whatever reason, you're just oil and water, then then it won't work. So don't do that.
Yeah, and you touched on it there, right? So true. Partnership is like a marriage, maybe even worse, right? Then there might be even more at risk than even a marriage, right? Because we're talking big numbers here, and you can, if you have a bad deal because of a bad partnership, it can kind of ruin your career, right? Because your reputation will be done. So it's important that you understand who you're partnering up with, and you touched on it there that all your team has sort of different strengths, right? You don't want to partner up with 3 other people that are super analytical and are great at underwriting, and nobody's good at raising money, and nobody's good at maybe making connections with investors and whatnot, so you need to understand what their strengths are, what your strengths are, and kind of find people to fill your weaknesses and for you to fill other people's weaknesses. So maybe talk a little bit about that, because I think that's, partnerships is a fantastic way, a phenomenal way to go, right? Because I always say 1 and 1 doesn't equal 2, it equals 4 or 5 or 6 or 10, right? Because you go so much exponentially further with a partner than you would by yourself, I feel like. So maybe talk a little bit how you found your partners and why you like partnering with them.
So I think to start with, and you touched on this a little bit, I think like a syndication of a deal of any size, unless you're way far down the road and maybe you have like a whole team of like employees and like virtual assistants and stuff like that to help you, it's just way too much work for any one person, even if they were doing it full time, which none of us were, because we all had day jobs. It's just too much work for one person to do on his or herself. There's just no way. It's just impossible. I don't care how smart you are or how capable you are. And then also there will be business decisions, and just to have 1 or 2 or 3 other people to discuss those decisions with, it really helps, because you think you're kind of right and you're not sure, and it's good just to at least bounce that off of somebody else. And that's a case where, talking about it with your best friend probably won't help you all that much. So it helps to have somebody else who's there with you to do it. I think in terms of kind of your team or your roster, I think you want one person with some sort of construction or rehab experience, because more likely than not, you're doing some sort of value add. And even though you can have a professional person go and do the due diligence walkthrough with you, and you will have somebody, a local contractor or something who really knows their stuff do that. But it really helps to have somebody who just knows how buildings are built and how things break. And if like the HVAC unit or something like that, if it turns out that it needs like some sort of cleaning, somebody could say, oh, well, $500 to do that? That's outrageous. It should be $200, because unless you've really been in that world for a long time, there's no way generally to know that. And you could learn all one of those things individually. And I don't think watching like a fix and flip show on HGTV, that's a little bit helpful, but that's probably not going to fill it in for you. And then that's a time drain anyway. So I think you want one person with those sorts of skills. In this case, we all raised money, but in the future, I think if there's someone who is kind of your primary money raiser, that can be very helpful. I think it's useful to have someone with maybe slightly above average computer skills, just to help with setting up websites and recording webinars and things like that, where personally having kind of average computer skills myself, those are the sorts of things where suddenly it's like just quicksand for like 3 or 4 hours while I'm trying to figure that out, where somebody else who actually knows what they're doing can do it in like 20 minutes. So that's really helpful. And then I think otherwise it's just having a willingness to kind of just go and do what needs to be done, whether it's opening the bank account. That was incredibly hard, and I didn't anticipate how hard it would be to open the bank account for the LLC doing it the first time. That was an incredible pain in the neck. So just, I was the one actually who sat there on hold and kind of dealt with that all the time. And again, I didn't need to be a genius to do that, but I had to be willing to put in the hours and follow through to finally get that done. And so that's really the most important skill, I think, is a willingness to just go do whatever needs to be done and kind of stake out some work and work together and communicate and talk and hold each other accountable and just push forward.
Yeah, that's great. Interestingly, that's something we haven't talked about at all here, and people maybe don't think about that, is setting up the bank account, right, for the LLC. Maybe talk a little bit about how that works and why you set it up for the LLC, why you don't put it in your own personal name. Of course, I know, but for people listening, maybe talk a little bit about that, because I think that's an interesting subject.
Well, I guess first off, it's you never know what your investors are going to ask you, and you should be prepared to answer absolutely anything. And so if they happen to ask you, hey, do you have an LLC for this thing? What's the bank? I was like, oh no, it's just going to go right in there in my checking account. Don't worry, I'll keep it separate. Yeah, no, that's not going to happen. And it wouldn't surprise me if your lender probably wants you to form an LLC too. I will say what was really complicated about the bank account, and I had no idea about this, is the bank wants to have a brick and mortar location where each one of the partners physically lives. And I don't know why that is, but you can fight that battle and you'll lose. So that's just one thing you have to do. We were in 4 different locations throughout the United States, and so it was surprisingly difficult, even amongst the bigger chains, to find a bank that had a brick and mortar location in all of our towns. That's important. That's also why generally you want to use one of the bigger kind of like national banks and your local credit union. And I love my local credit union, but a lot of the times they're not the way to go. So you may have to go with something like that. And then what was hard was there's actually some paperwork that came after 9/11 with regards to, I guess, proving that you're not opening up the LLC for some sort of scary terrorist thing, which is, it's like in a million years, it would never occur to me and most people to do anything like that. But the banks really need that paperwork, and you have to get your physical signature on all that. So the number one thing I learned is you can do the physical signature with your finger on the computer screen, because otherwise if you don't all live in the same town, you're scanning and faxing, and your signature is invisible after the 4th scan and fax. So those are the 2 lessons I learned there, that had I known it earlier, that could have saved me quite a bit of time. So small things, but but who knew, right?
Yeah. And I guess that's maybe one challenging thing. Like, it's good to have 3 partners, but then again, I guess that's another, might be one challenging thing that I wouldn't have thought of before, is because that everyone needs to sign everything. That's 3 signatures every time. That's 3 pieces of paperwork. That's 3 people that you have to coordinate with everything that you're doing every single time. That, I guess it takes time, right? Because not everyone's on the same time schedule. People are working, people are busy.
Yeah, the good news is, I think, other than the bank account thing, like most things don't require everyone to have their signature on the same page, and you can usually just do 4 versions of the same thing. But it's surprising how much of a big real estate transaction, it's still, they want the physical signature, and it has to be in blue ink. Must be blue ink. They will accept no other ink other than blue ink. Must be single-sided printed, not double-sided printed. I learned that one the hard way too. And then you just overnight it into somebody. But a lot of weird, seemingly kind of archaic stuff like that in our digital age is still needed for a big real estate transaction. So that's stuff you learn. Who knew?
Out of interest, what was the size of the deal, and what was the purchase price, if you don't mind sharing?
Sure. The deal was relatively small. It was 28 units, and the purchase price was $2 million.
Okay. So then what kind of financing did you guys get on that?
We got Fannie Freddie agency financing. And one thing that is a really helpful little bit of advice, I think, to someone who's just starting out is, if you can, I would strongly suggest getting into someone else's deal as a limited partner. And if you network enough, a lot of the times, just because real estate investors are not in the business of saying no to someone who wants to invest with them, even if it's relatively small. So if you meet someone who's doing a relatively smaller deal, or you become pals with somebody who's a little bit more advanced than you are, that you meet networking or any other way, a lot of the times they'll let you into their deal for maybe $10,000 or less. And it almost doesn't matter if you're putting in $1 or $1,000,000. When you do that, as a limited partner, you own the building. And when you then want to be a general partner later, that I can't say how much it counts because I'm not a lender or lending expert, but I know that does count as far as the lenders are concerned, because they see that you have experience in owning a multifamily building, and they're more likely to help to get you a loan as part of the general partner team. So being a limited partner in someone else's deal, it's kind of like a little like multifamily merit badge, I guess. You get to kind of stitch onto your sash, and it will help you out later in addition to being a really cool investment. So that's a good thing to know in terms of lending.
Yeah, yeah. And I think there's a lot of benefits to being a passive investor. I've talked about this in them. I invested passive in a deal. For one, you have that experience, right? You get that experience of seeing what kind of deals they look at, what kind of, how they underwrite, how they report, how do they handle investor relations, now currently how they handle stuff when things go wrong. But also at the same time, you learn all these things, but at the same time, you also get a return. So you're not paying, like you can pay for education, or you can actually get a return for your education. And like you said, also it can help when talking to banks for that experience, and you can kind of say that you have that experience of being in a deal. Now doesn't count solely as experience, but it can help, like you mentioned.
Yeah, it's better to have that than to not have it. I think I can say that definitively. I think the other thing that's really useful is you'll be signing the private placement memorandum, and I'm sure you know that, but for your listeners, that's basically the final document. I guess the private placement memorandum, rather, when you're doing a syndication, you're technically selling a security. And so the private placement memorandum is what allows you as a syndicator to sell securities. And then as an investor, you sign the private placement memorandum to codify how many securities you're buying in your investment in the building. I think that's basically how it works. Maybe an actual attorney could probably explain it better. But when you do that, as I'm sure you well know, it's a big, long, honking legal document, and there's lots of small print, there's lots of like all caps print, there's lots of information there. But the big one that you will go through is it lists every conceivable thing that could go wrong, because what the syndicators, what the attorneys are looking for is they don't want something to happen and then you come back as an investor and say, oh, I never knew that could happen. So it's like a Godzilla could come out of the sewer and like destroy the building. I mean, it gets almost down to like that level. But I mean, there's like, somebody could put a really great building across the street. Now nobody wants to live in your building. Somebody could put a really bad building across the street. Now nobody wants to live in your building because there's this dump across the street. It's things like that. And I think reading that language, seeing all that small print in that big print, and then putting, even if it is just $10,000 or more, that's a lot of money to me. I'm sure it's a lot of money to most people. Wiring that sort of cash in, putting your signature on that piece of paper, and doing that, like that's when stuff gets real, for sure. And then later, when you're trying to raise money yourself, you now know what it's like for someone to have, a pretty big chunk of cash, read this 90-page legal document and put their signature on it and wire it to you. And that is a high hurdle to get over, but that's what it takes. So that's what you got to do.
Yeah, the PPM always surprises me that, not that it surprises me that it doesn't scare more investors away, because it's like something like one of the first lines it says or something is you have to be prepared to lose or be willing to lose every single penny you put in the deal. Something, I'm paraphrasing, but something along those lines, right? And I'm like, I read that, I was like, people still invest after they read this. But
yeah, I guess I'm sorry. Just to me, like nobody, like kind of what a sophisticated investor is. I know that's kind of there's no definitive definition of it, but in my opinion, if you read through a private placement memorandum and you've analyzed the deal really well, and you are willing to put your signature on that thing and send over a big check, that is, to me, that's when you become sophisticated, because that's when you've read through the legal stuff and you've analyzed a deal well enough that you're willing to put your money where your mouth is and go for it. So strongly recommend people being limited partners, being passive investors as a stepping stone to being a general partner.
Yeah, very true, very true. So were all four of you, so there's four of you, right? That was partners on that deal. Were all of you new? Did any of you have any previous experience, like, apart from being passive investors?
I believe that one of us had done several fixes and flips and some Airbnbs and things like that. And I know some smaller kind of one-off like investments in like individual condo properties, I think. And, you know, obviously owning, I think by and large, our own homes. But for all of us, that was, and we'd all done key partner investments in multifamily. But that was, I think, for all of us, our first general partner multifamily deal.
Oh wow, that's cool then. Okay, that's
yeah.
So that helps with my next few questions, especially for people, you know, who are listening to, who want to start out, right? So when you're starting out, you know, it's challenging because you're trying to get credibility with everyone. You know, you're trying to get credibility with a lender. You're trying to get credibility with brokers. You're trying to get credibility with investors, right? Because you haven't done a deal, and multifamily is a lot different than a single family. It's the same, but very different at the same time, right? How were you guys able? So for one, maybe talk about the financing first, and we'll get into the other elements afterwards. How were you guys able to get the financing? Because obviously on a $2 million property, I'm guessing you needed at least $500,000 probably down, right? And you need to persuade, and you need that liquidity and net worth for the most part equal or greater to the loan. How were you guys able to get that loan?
So between the four of us, we had the liquidity and the net worth, and that's why you really need to partner. Because you know, by myself, I certainly did not have a liquidity or the net worth. So, so that was helpful because we'd all been key partners in other syndications. That got us most of the way to having enough experience to get the loan. However, this was, I think, shortly after the government shutdown, and one of the Fannie Freddie offices that normally would have done the loan, they were still kind of slow to get back up, and one of the other ones did it, and they wanted somebody else on the loan who had more experience. And so one of the people that we had been working with was nice enough to put himself on the loan without snagging any of the deal himself, just to kind of get himself on there to give us that extra little bit of credibility. But actually, in retrospect, it worked out well for the four of us, and I can probably get into this more with some of your next questions, but it does help to have somebody who has more experience on the project. One, for help getting loans, but also it helps a lot with fundraising, which I think we learned. We pulled it off, but we learned that one the hard way. So that's useful too.
Yeah, because getting a loan on commercial can be challenging, right? It doesn't quite work the same as single family. It's not like the DTI, right? The debt to income is all they look at, right? They want to understand that you have experience in running this kind of property. You know, you buy a 26 unit property. You know, it's not a small size property, right? There's 26 tenants. There's a lot that can go wrong, and if you have no prior experience, the bank is thinking, well, how are they going to run it? How are they going to, more than anything, how are they going to pay us, right? That's all they care about, is getting that debt payment paid all the time. So they need to understand how you guys are going to run it, right? And also, do you guys have the net worth and liquidity? They usually ask for a net worth and liquidity equal or greater to the loan amounts, which is $2 million here, which was no small amount. But what you said there, that is, I think a lot of people can use and can learn from, is that you guys brought a key principle in, right? A person to sign a loan, someone who had that, not necessarily liquidity or net worth this time, because you guys met that, but it is that experience, because that bank wants that experience. And the great thing about this is such a team sport, right? Multifamily is such a team sport. So whatever you don't have on your team you can bring on and compensate that person for, and they'll bring on and sign on the loan as well. And now you have that experience because that person is part of the deal, and you can get that loan and get into your first deal. If you don't mind me asking, how did you guys work that out with the key principal? Did you guys compensate them? Did you give them a piece of the deal, or
so this was the same person who, this was a member of the group that had kind of handed us the deal. So because they were willing to do it just to sign on, and that was it. So they were on the loan, but they haven't. So they were willing to do that for free, which was super nice of them. Although I will say that that group took every last penny of the acquisition fee. So it was their deal. So that's okay. You gotta pay your dues. So that's part of how they work that out. Although I will say my next deal, I'm definitely getting some of that acquisition. Acquisition fee, I can tell you that much. Oh my, that was a lot of work. It would have been nice to it's a little at the end of it.
Yeah. But I think with your first deal, a lot of times it's that creating that track record, right? Is getting into that first deal. It's not about the actual monetary value that you get out of that deal. It's more about that experience and that credibility that you've done your first deal. Now that you can go on to your second, your third, your fourth, and that's when you really start making the money. Whereas opposed to that first deal is just getting into it and whatever it takes, as you guys do.
Whatever it takes, you got to just go do, and then you're getting so many other things in addition to it. It has to be a good deal too, so you have to be making some money, but you gotta get other stuff too.
Yeah, what was, so let's talk a little bit, if you don't mind, talk a little bit about the capital raising side of things, the LPs, the limited partners, the investors that you guys brought on board. What was the raise, and how did you guys go about finding investors?
So I'm trying to remember all the precise, the raise. So we put a lot of, we did the kind of 8% preferred 80-20 split model. And so we each put in a certain amount of money, and then that, in this case, that becomes the company share. And so then as the general partners, we get the same returns on what we put in as the limited partners do. And then if the cash flow is better than 8% on an annual basis for the amount of money over 8%, the limited partners would get 80% of that, and we get 20% of it. So I like that model because it works so long as you have a path to your building getting an 8% cash on cash return or better. Whereas other models, sometimes you have to get to like a 12 or 13% cash on cash return, which is great, but that is really hard to do. So especially right now. So that helps out in that extent. And also I think the limited partners or the investors like it because as the general partners, you have to get above that 8% cash on cash return to really do well yourself. So there's a real, not that you would need it, because of course you always want to do well, but it helps to have kind of a codified benefit of the general partners to managing the building really well. So we put in some of the money, and I think we had to raise about $550,000 or so to cover the rest of the down payment, the renovation costs, and then the closing costs, the brokerage fee, the acquisition fee, which we didn't get, and then the typical closing costs, the utilities and the syndication fees and all that good stuff. And so this is where this was the hardest part. This is where I definitely can see things in retrospect that I would have done differently and I would do differently. So the key thing is, I think you need to get verbal commitments of probably 300% of what you actually need in terms of people actually wiring money towards you, because getting somebody to read that PPM, sign it, and then press that button and take $25,000, $50,000, $75,000 out of their bank account and put it into yours, that is a very hard thing to do. And people I have found do not like to say no to you. And so they'll kind of next weekend do a lot. And you'll walk through the deal with them and they say, oh yeah, I'll get to you next week. And it's like, dude, like you could have just said no 3 weeks ago, because I am trained and I will make you say no to me 15 times, or maybe to me 15 times. And until you really say, heck no, pal, I'm not going to give up, because that's just how it works. You have to work through it like that. So we had some really good investor materials. We did a really great webinar, which we recorded, and then we could send that to people. I would say it probably had a bit too much information in it, because we wanted just to show how we knew, like, we dotted every I, we crossed every T. But the big mistake I made, and I did raise some money, but my partners raised a little bit more, was you meet people and the networking and all that stuff, and you have a good rapport with them. You present this deal to them, and suddenly it's just this avalanche of information. And there's other high network, but then the people you meet at real estate seminars, a lot of the time, they want to save their $50,000 for their own deal. So, they're really interested in yours, but that's not necessarily the best place to raise money. And then if you go to other places or to other sources who may be high net worth individuals, but they're not experts in real estate, and they haven't done all this real estate training that you have to explain to them what it is. And multifamily real estate investing, it's not that complicated, but it's too big of a meal for someone just to eat in one sitting. I mean, there's just too much information. A really smart person, to get an hour of their time first to explain how multifamily investing works, and then an hour of their time to explain why your deal is a great one and they should invest in it. You're asking way too much of people. So what I would do differently is, and it's a lot of what you're doing, Barry, is you want to meet a lot of people, get out there, have at the very least an email list of all the people you connect with, making contact with them every now and again, talking about real estate, talking about your story. And then when a deal comes along, you can say, oh, hey, we're still looking. It's not under contract yet, but just so you all know, this one looks really cool. So, keep your eyes peeled, because I'm going to show you something great later. And then of that list, if you have 20, 30, 40, 50 people who you've made a really great connection with, or you sort of feel are your A-list, for lack of a better phrase, then contact them maybe one at a time, try to get a phone call with them, and maybe tell them a little bit more about the deal, just so they can really get primed for it. And then when you actually have your webinars and your presentations, things under contract, and you're raising money, ideally they're kind of warmed up for it, and you're not trying to get somebody to go from like 0 to 80 miles an hour all at once. You have them going like 45, 50, and they're interested, they're thinking about investing with you, they're ready to give it a real good consideration, and then they'll do it. So that was the mistake I made personally the first go around, is I tried to do it all at once with people I felt like I had really great connections with, and it was probably unfair on my part. I did get a couple of investors. It was incredibly hard to do, and we pulled it off, but it was not a stress-free situation over the last 3-4 weeks. I'll put it that way. There's a lot of days of adrenaline and coffee for breakfast, and just doing the best you can. So that was a good lesson learned.
Yeah, but I'm sure those lessons learned, even though as hard as they may have been, are gonna, bode well for the future for you. They're gonna.
Oh, yeah. I never want to feel that way again. Oh my gosh, is this gonna happen or not? I tried for this so hard. You're gonna lose the thing because we didn't quite raise enough money, and honestly, because I could have raised more money, because my partners did raise more than I did, and I never. That is a very memorable feeling. I never want to have that. I never want to feel that way again. So I'm gonna do it right the second time.
Yeah. So what will you be doing differently then? I think that's a good.
So I've started. I have an email list that I should actually, now that you mention it, keep up with again soon. And I've also met a number of people who are interested in investing with me, so I know who on that list to kind of target, for lack of a better word. I also have a connection in the family office that I've worked with, who could be willing to do a lot of the raise on his own if he likes it, although I don't want to count on that necessarily. And then also I'm networking with people, and I have people who are interested in working with me who have really taken, who have sort of carved out the money raiser niche, which is a great niche to carve out because I don't know if you like ice hockey or not, but if you can raise money, you're like a hockey player who scores a lot of goals, you know, and there's always room on a hockey team for somebody who scores a lot of goals. And I think there is always room on a real estate syndication partnership for somebody who's really great at raising money. And pretty much anybody will be willing to work with you then. So that's a great skill. That's a great way to sort of grow yourself, a great niche to sort of fill. And so I've met a few of those people. They're eager to work with me. And so, really, I'm at the point where if I find the deal, I'm confident I can put a pretty good team together to take it down where I'll still be raising money. And you always want to raise money, in my opinion, because it's such a great way to network and to get to know people and to go say to the world, oh, hey, look at me. I found this awesome deal. And you get to go invest in it. And even the people who don't, then you tell them, oh, hey, we closed. It was great. You know, hope you can catch the next one. So I think you always do want to be raising money, but I do not want to be the primary money raiser in a deal because that's tough. So that's not quite how I've grown myself. So but I know somebody who does, so that's helpful.
Yeah, and it's like you said, it's like the hockey analogy. It's so true, right? You never got to say no to a guy who scores a lot of goals, right? It's the same with real estate. You never at the point where, well, I have too much money. I have too much money. No. You know, it's very rare that you have too much money because you're always, if you have money, you're going to find deals to some extent because people take you more seriously, right? So it's that thing of, you know, if you can find someone who can bring money every time, that's a home run for you right there. So that's really cool. How is that deal doing now? Did you say that you closed on it this year?
We closed April of 2019, so we've had about a year and a half of ownership, and like everybody, I'll back up a little bit. It cash flowed from day one. It cash flowed about 4% to start off with, which is good but not great, and it took us a while to do the turnovers. It was a C-class building in what I think is a rapidly gentrifying submarket. But one thing that happens when you take over an under-rented C-class building is you have a lot of fairly questionable tenants. And so we lost a whole bunch of those right away, which was a good thing and a bad thing because you know, they saw the writing on the wall and they knew that the building was going to improve and that the rent was going to go up, so they just left. So that made it easier to fill those units because now they were empty. The bad news was that especially when we have a 28-unit building, you can't have that many vacancies. You want to stay away from that place. We have so many vacancies where you're in danger of not being able to pay your bills. And we never quite got there. It was a little hard to lease it up at first. We got better and better at it. And there's a whole bunch of other stories there I could talk about, but just to answer your first question, like everybody, we were kind of freaked out about COVID, and it really hasn't slowed us down one bit. We are knocking out of the park. 28 units filled, 28 units paying. I would say we'd be well on our way to a 10% plus cash on cash return over our second year of ownership. So we're doing incredibly well, and actually if some of the lending requirements that came up with COVID go away in the first of the year, which they might, we will probably be looking at probably doing a cash out refinance, possibly because we've added a lot of value to the building. We've benefited from cap rates compressing a little bit, and depending on what the lender thinks, we should be able to get quite a bit of money out of it. So it's going incredibly well.
Wow, congratulations. That's to be able to hopefully cash out that quickly. That's quite the deal. You know, especially in, you know, maybe 2 years. That's the dream for everyone, right?
Yeah. Sorry, my computer's about to run out of battery, so I moved to plug it in.
No problem at all. As long as you're not going to the bathroom, that's okay.
The two places in my house that aren't completely messy, so that's all right.
That's good. Well, cool. Well, that's a great. So I think that's, inspiring for everyone to kind of think that, you can do your own syndication, especially, if you find some good partners. Even if nobody has that much experience on the team, you can kind of make it happen, right? If you're willing to do whatever it takes, like you mentioned there, and you have that perseverance. That's cool. So, as I mentioned to you before, this show is called Wrestling with Real Estate, and I like to ask wrestling-themed real estate questions. So I give you a little bit of a heads up first, but this is the one that always gets people off, is like, what would your wrestling name be?
I was thinking about that one. I loved wrestling growing up, like in the 80s especially. So I remember the villain, the Iron Sheik. So I think I'll be the Iron Syndicator.
The Irons, I like that.
The Iron Syndicator Spear. How about that?
I like that. You even have the wrestling photo behind you. So for the people in the podcast, there's a wrestling picture on the wall, I think, right?
That's boxing, but close enough.
Oh, okay. Cool. Well, every wrestler has a special move. What would your special move be in real estate?
I would call myself the CEO, and by that I mean I'm like the CEO of the deal. So what I have found my strength is really networking and finding people and kind of putting the details together. So and just sort of being willing to be the one who introduces people to people, and the kind of the classic, oh, hey, would you ever want to work on something together, and following through with that and kind of building the team ahead of finding the deal. So I guess it would be the CEO. I'm not exactly sure what that looks like in terms of, actually elbowing somebody or body slamming them, but I like that. The CEO, that'd be my finishing.
I like that too, because it's just definitely a big strength to be able to connect people, right? You don't always want to be the person doing the job, right? You don't want to be the person fixing the toilet or whatever. You want to be the guy that owns the plumbing company, right? That tells people where to go and does, handles all that stuff. So yeah, I think that's great. That's a great strength to have. What's been the biggest body slam you've taken in your real estate investing career?
The biggest, the one I've taken?
Yes.
Oh gosh, I would have to say it was struggling to raise money for the first deal. That was incredibly stressful. So that was kind of like the welcome to the NFL moment, I would say. That's how you're actually doing this, when you're talking to person after person after person, trying to raise money from them, trying to sell the deal to people. So I would say struggling to do that, but succeeding. That was the biggest body slam.
So was there a moment you were standing on the top rope getting ready to jump? You were scared. What was it, and how did you overcome it?
Oh gosh, so many. When I first started, I was absolutely terrified, and I felt like I just made this horrible mistake. And I remember I was sick to my stomach. I could feel my eyes itching behind my contact lenses, and it was just like, oh my God, what have I done? What have I done? What have I done? And it was just pulling forward and persevering through that. I had a huge hang up about calling brokers at first, just because I just didn't have confidence, and I felt like I don't really know what I'm doing. I'm calling this person, I know there's people in my network who could take this thing down. I've never really done it before. And what I learned in time, though, is every single time that I kind of felt sick to my stomach and I had no clue what I was doing. Putting in my first offer, that was absolutely terrifying, just because an LOI doesn't really mean anything, but still to put in, yes, I want to purchase this for $15 million, and I will put down $100,000 of earnest money, sign Daniel Spear, send. And it's like, I don't have $100,000 and I don't have $50 million. Oh my God, what am I doing? What am I doing? But every time I read something like that, and even when it didn't work, or when things didn't turn out perfectly, which it usually didn't, I came out ahead every single time. So every time I flailed and failed, I won. That's how I see it. So, and now whenever I have that kind of itchy feeling in my stomach, I know I'm doing the right thing. So I learned to welcome that feeling.
Yeah. If you're comfortable doing something, you're probably, you're not challenging yourself enough, right? Yeah. That's really cool to hear. Well, cool, Daniel. Well, thank you so much, man. This has been a really fun interview. I think it's such a cool story to hear, how you guys did your first syndication. I love how you guys made it happen, and just, whatever it took, right? You talked about setting up that LLC with a bank, right? It didn't matter how many hours you had to be on the phone. You were going to do it because it needed to be done, right? You weren't going to let that pass you by, and you were going to make the deal happen. And you guys found a way to make the financing work. You find out, to get the deal work, you had to give away all of the acquisition fee, but ultimately, what does it matter, right? You guys have done your first syndication deal. Now you can go, and thankfully as well, luckily to you guys' skills and success, the deal has been a success, and you can go now, and the next deal hopefully will be easier, and the next one after that will be even easier, and you're just going to keep growing, I think. So congratulations on all of that.
Thank you, Barry.
So so cool. Well, thank you so much. Before we go, if anyone wants to reach out to you, to hear more about what you're doing and what's coming next for you, how can they get a hold of you?
I would give out my phone number, but that's a little I'll do my email, danspear7@gmail.com. That is DANSPEAR, the number 7@gmail.com.
Cool. I'll include that in the description, the show notes below. So thank you so much, Daniel, for wrestling with real estate today. It has been a really fun interview, and I appreciate you giving us the time.
Thank you, Barry. This has been outstanding. I appreciate it.